On this episode, we travel to New Orleans for the National Conference on Disaster Planning for the Carless Society. Then we learn about steps for a healthier New Orleans. Finally, we look at bicycle and pedestrian planning in New Orleans. Stay tuned. We're at the University of New Orleans talking with John Rennie. You were chair of a conference that just ended minutes ago. What was the name of your conference?
It was called the National Conference on Disaster Planning for the Carless Society. A long name. Basically, it's the conference on how do you evacuate carless people that don't have access to cars.
What was the inspiration for the conference?
Hurricane Katrina. I had just moved here 2 weeks before the storm. I've done a lot of research in the area of public transportation, walking and cycling, and I moved to New Orleans because it was a city that I could live in without having to own a car. I live in the Lower Garden District, which is a very accessible neighborhood where I can walk, take transit, the St. Charles streetcar, one of the oldest streetcar lines in the world. And 2 weeks after I moved here, the storm came down, and my wife and I had to rent a car to evacuate. And during that whole process, I realized the issues associated with not being able to evacuate because you don't have access to a car. The evacuation of Hurricane Katrina, while being the most successful evacuation in U.S. history, was also the worst evacuation in U.S. history, because if you had a car, you could evacuate. But if you didn't have a car, you couldn't get out.
What sort of people were at this conference, and what sort of things did they talk about?
The people that we had at the conference were a mix of transportation professionals and transportation planners, emergency managers and officials, and nonprofits, particularly those representing kind of the healthcare and special needs communities.
And what sort of things have to fall into place for carless evacuation to be successful?
Well, it's very complex. That's what we learned here at this 2-day event. It is very complex, but it's possible. There needs to be communication. I would say that the two things that I've learned that need to happen for an evacuation to include carless individuals is there needs to be communication amongst different levels of government, from the federal right down to the local, amongst the citizens, the private sector, the public sector. And the other thing that's very important is the planning and the process needs to be inclusive of those with disabilities, those that don't own cars. We can't have professionals who drive everywhere, making the plans and the decisions. The planning and the decision-making process needs to be inclusive of those who represent the carless society.
Obviously, hurricane evacuation would have been one of the main focuses here. Did you look at other evacuation scenarios?
We talked a bit about the need for an all-hazards evacuation plans, but the truth is that carless evacuation is such a new subfield within transportation and within emergency management. It's something that hasn't really been addressed. So the topic, because we're in New Orleans and because we have a lot of speakers who deal a lot with hurricane evacuation, was on hurricane evacuation. We need to talk about all hazards evacuation for the Carless Society, but we're just at the tip of the iceberg in discussing these issues. It's something that needs to occur. This discussion needs to occur, an ongoing process. We need to really frame what the discussion is. And I'm going to be working on a grant from the Federal Transit Administration, which just got started. It's a 4-year study, and it will look at all hazards evacuation planning for carless and special needs populations. So we just at the beginning. We have a long way to go.
You mentioned the grant that you have that you'll be working on. What are the next steps on this long journey we're going to be going on?
Well, There's several initiatives and efforts underway. The Transportation Research Board has convened a committee looking at these issues. I believe the Department of Homeland Security has some study underway looking at these issues. Our study is funded by the Federal Transit Administration. There's momentum building up in this area. I think what we need to do is we need to frame the discussion, begin to understand who needs to be a part of that discussion, from emergency managers, transportation planners, those that provide services to the community, and the users themselves. And it will be different for different regions. For example, New York City in 2000, 56% of the households didn't have access to cars. So in a place like New York, the city is a majority of a carless society. Now, in a city like New Orleans, 27% of the households didn't have access to cars, which is still a pretty big number. But the one thing that I have learned in my research since Hurricane Katrina is that New Orleans is not unique in terms of having a carless population or being vulnerable for disasters. There are 7 cities that have a higher percentage of carless people, and when you include the fact that the elderly population is growing in this country, that there's a substantial percentage of people that cannot drive because of various disabilities, this is something that what you saw in New Orleans is something that can happen anywhere. And I think many people around the country tend to think, well, it was a result of bad planning in New Orleans. Well, I looked at evacuation plans from all over the country, and I found that the evacuation plans in other major cities are actually worse than the plans that we had in New Orleans. So it's a real wake-up call for our country to begin looking at these issues.
We're in New Orleans, Louisiana, talking with Jennifer Ruley with Steps to a Healthier New Orleans. What is Steps to a Healthier New Orleans?
Yes, Steps to a Healthier New Orleans is a 3-year-old grant to the city of New Orleans from the Centers for Disease Control. It's part of the Steps to a Healthier U.S. program that's administered on a nationwide basis. My specific role in this grant is as an urban planning specialist, and what I do specifically is focus on the pedestrian and bicycle environment and making improvements, planning improvements and implementing them in Orleans Parish so that we can affect public health outcomes such as physical activity. We're also focused on, besides obesity, we're focused on asthma and diabetes. And so my position is funded through a grant to the city, and my job is physically located within City Hall so that I can have continuous interaction with city agencies who have responsibilities for pedestrian facilities.
Now what's the connection between good pedestrian facilities and good health?
Well, I think that most people who probably watch this show have seen they know what a good pedestrian facility is versus a not good pedestrian facility, and I think that's the importance of your program. It's we aren't able to exactly put our finger on it, but we know that maybe this environment is more welcoming to pedestrians versus another. So the objective is to kind of merge the sort of aesthetics and safety and just logical design of pedestrian facilities so that they are a place where people want to be, they want to be active, and they want to use their legs on a regular basis.
Imagine things got held up a little bit with the trouble with the Katrina devastation. Are you getting back on your feet? What are you getting done now?
Sure. Yeah, we have had a major interruption due to the Katrina, the impact of Katrina and the subsequent flooding. We had probably $500,000 worth of pedestrian-oriented projects that we were working on before the storm. And what the problem had been is just getting those projects set as priorities, like post-Katrina priorities, because of course disaster response, disaster recovery, and then long-term planning took precedence over any other sort of priorities before the storm. And so what I've been doing is working with our regional planning commission and our city planning commission, as well as our infrastructure agencies like the Department of Public Works, to ensure that these projects did not get left behind, and that we make sure that pedestrian-oriented projects are still a priority, and that we focus our efforts on making those projects that can do something now, that are funded, putting those into action. And then there's some other issues that we discovered due to the storm, and that's basically just the role that infrastructure plays in disaster response for people. If they have a place a place like in this last disaster that's high and dry, they'll use it. Connectivity of those facilities with other facilities, especially shelters, that sort of thing, is important. I think that a lot of people saw the national news and saw a lot of people walking from their homes to shelters, and so this is part of how we approach business these days in New Orleans, is keeping those people and their needs in mind with everything we do.
And does New Orleans have any advantages as a walking city?
Oh yeah, New Orleans is, I think that part of what sets New Orleans apart as a city that's unique in the nation is its his walkability. I would say that New Orleans is a very walkable city. It's in many cases, some of the historic parts of New Orleans are very sort of dense and have a lot of mixed use, and we are basically the model, an intact model left from the past. We're kind of sort of like a time capsule, and people are in other cities are seeking to develop much like what we have in the French Quarter and uptown areas and so forth. So I think that the key is, sure, there are walkable. The advantages of being walkable are that we are an attractive community for people to live in, but on the other hand, we have issues with trying to be more pedestrian friendly. There's a big difference between being walkable and being pedestrian friendly, and what we're trying to do is match our efforts with infrastructure improvement, with an enforcement and education campaign that could work to affect the pedestrian friendliness, improve the pedestrian friendliness of the city of New Orleans.
We're in New Orleans talking with Karen Parsons with the Regional Planning Commission. What role does the Regional Planning Commission play in pedestrian and bicycle stuff?
Well, I'm a transportation planner there, and we have over the last 5 years worked on instituting a program to improve safety. So because we work closely with the state DOT and the local parishes and municipalities, and because we do transportation issues mainly, our focus generally is on improving safety, so reducing crashes and fatalities associated with bike and pedestrians, and improving the facility designs.
And you're a planning organization. What sort of planning goes on to accomplish the improved safety?
Well, our history, we, after Transportation Enhancement Funds, a federal program came into being, we supported our local parishes in building bike paths on the river levees and on the lakefront of Lake Pontchartrain for 10 years. And part of that was just getting over the obstacles of allowing, getting the Corps of Engineers and the local levee districts to allow that to happen and to ensure the integrity of the levees were still in place. And we've done a pretty good job of building bike paths, separated paths, all over the region. And we are still trying to complete those. However, we've shifted our focus since about 2001, and we are really trying to improve the street system and make it more accommodating and safe, because that's really where most of our cyclists are. They're not recreation cyclists, and in most cities, well, perhaps not most cities, but in New Orleans we have a huge number of cyclists that rely on a bicycle because we are at least pre-Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, we had 27% of our population in Orleans Parish without cars, households without cars. In the entire region, it was more like 15% of the households had no cars. And so we found that there were a huge number of people who were very reliant on bicycles. And so this was an issue that needed to be addressed. And what we have tried to do is to basically enculturate within the institution of the Departments of Public Works a desire to incorporate good thinking and strategies in their everyday engineering and design work, so that they are accommodating the cyclists in a way they need to accommodate them. And also with the local planning authorities of the parishes or the municipalities. It takes time to change the culture, but we've had some successes in doing that. Most recently, we were funded by the state of Louisiana Highway Safety Commission for a 3-year program to do training for planners and engineers. And we've done that once last year, about 40 planners and engineers from the region that are in the public sector. Some were private sector engineering firms that do work for the public sector. So that's an important piece, so that everybody understands how to do it, because generally there's no training in colleges and universities specific to bike and ped design. So that was one piece. We're also working to develop a program and do law enforcement training so that the enforcement piece is covered. We will be also working with the city attorneys or district attorneys, so that when a motorist is ticketed, a ticket for a violation against a cyclist or a pedestrian, that it would be followed up in court properly and not thrown out. Because what we found is there isn't a lot of understanding about the severity of what that means to individuals, and the rights under the law are there for bikes and peds, but they're not really held up in court. So that will also be worked on. And again, that's changing the culture within the court system and within the law enforcement system to be more helpful and to be a part of the solution, because a lot of it is about behavior change. So
it sounds like a lot of what you're doing is just helping to train and inform the people who are actually getting out there and doing things.
Yeah, I mean, it's a multi-pronged solution. And I think once we started looking at it 5 years ago, we realized it wasn't simple. It was a big part of it was about behavior change, and it's not just on the part of drivers, it's also on the part of cyclists. We're trying to educate cyclists by encouraging them to do what they're already supposed to do by law, which is to ride on the right side of the road, and for motorists to swing wide, give cyclists lots of room on the road so as not to endanger them, and to yield to bikes and peds. I mean, those are very simple things, but they're not necessarily adhered to or acknowledged in the minds of most drivers. We were successful in, I think, 2002 to get some of the first language in the Office of Motor Vehicles driver's booklet that told anybody who was taking the state driver's test that what their responsibilities were around a bicyclist. That was a big deal. It took a lot to get that in there, and it's now printed and in there. And so if you're about 18 or younger, you know that. But all the rest of the population wasn't trained that way. So it's a slow process to inform drivers and cyclists and pedestrians about how they should behave.
You had a bit of a setback with the destruction from Katrina.
Just a bit.
Are you getting back to speed now on making progress with ped and bike issues and facilities?
Well, we had kind of worked ourselves up to a really nice point. We were just ready to sort of turn the corner. We had several really interesting projects getting ready to go in the ground. 288 bike racks were to be installed under a transportation enhancement project that was approved 2 or 3 years ago. And of course, these things take a little bit of time anyway, but that project got set back a couple of years. Some of the funding was needed. The funding that was for enhancements was used, at least temporarily, for debris removal for Katrina. And as you might guess, there was hundreds of thousands of tons of debris and trees, household debris, organic debris that needed to be removed from the region. And the Department of Transportation played a big role in making sure that emergency response was taken care of. And so they had to their credit, work with the funds that they had. And so projects, not just for Bike and Ped, but for other projects, were delayed. Now we're back on track. And that particular project will be funded. We have another project, Wisner Bike Path. It's a separate path that goes from the Lake Pontchartrain and connects to Jefferson Davis Bikeway. It will be let this June. That's a big deal. It's been 10 years in the making, but it's coming. We have another project that we're working on, which is the resurfacing and putting bike lanes on Wisner Boulevard, so that whole corridor both accommodates slower moving bicyclists and pedestrians, as well as faster moving, more experienced expert cyclists on the roadway. So that in itself is a big success, simply because it signals a time when in our city we began to understand that there are different levels of expertise that we're responsible for planning and designing for, different levels of expertise of cyclists. So in one corridor we'll actually have two facilities that accommodates both children to expert adults, and that should be in place in the next 3 or 4 years. One of the neat things that occurred before the storm is the City of New Orleans got a $18 million grant from the Center for Disease Control, and part of that was for to battle the obesity epidemic. And one of the pieces to solving that problem was to improve design of facilities. And what they did with some of that money was to hire a person and place them, get permission to place them within the Department of Public Works. She's an engineer, and she's helping to be sort of that liaison in the health community into the engineering community for designing. And it's been a wonderful crossover. We at the Regional Planning Commission hired somebody from the public health arena to work on the behavioral issues. And so that's been a nice crossover between transportation and public health, and the way we're using cross-fertilizing the issues and informing each other within different agencies about how to do things. So that's been a really wonderful success story.
A lot's going on.
Absolutely, a lot is going on. So much so that we really could use more staff people to do the work. But at least we have 2.5 full-time staff people for the region working on bike and ped. So that's really saying something from a time when there was barely one, half a person. So I tend to work on coordinating policy and then some of the local transportation projects. Jennifer at the Department of Public Works is designing, getting the criteria for the lane widths and what the city will accept institutionalized, so that even if she's gone, the engineers that come in behind her will have the blueprint for how to do it. They will have all their questions answered. It will be a part of the how-to. So when they are working on streets, if they're resurfacing a street, if it's on the bike plan, which was passed, the transportation element of the master plan was passed by the city of New Orleans, I believe, in 2002 or 2003, and it for the first time had a phased bike paths on there, named on street and off street. Some of them were green corridors, but mainly it was on the street network. So now when engineers do their work, hopefully they will say, okay, this street is ready for resurfacing, it's funded. Is it a named path on the system? What should we be doing? And they'll know what to do, how to restripe it. Most of the time it's about retrofitting an existing street, not widening it. So that's any signalization. We're trying to incorporate. We have a citywide signal project that's 100% federally funded. Many of the signals in New Orleans are being replaced, and many were damaged by the storm. But we're hoping to incorporate new pedestrian countdown signals with most of those. And again, that's just a change in thinking in terms of what is possible. If you don't have that as a part of your thinking, then you're not going to make sure it's a part of the package. But today, we're closer to making that happen.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.